to the podcast we see and hear today. Our first series was a great success and had some truly insightful topics, from creating engaging videos with Will Bonadio from Electric House to Facebook ads with Harry Gardner from Nexus PR. You can listen to the last series on Spotify and on Apple now. This series, we're turning it up a notch or two. It's a collaboration between digital marketing agency Base Creative and social media platform we know and love, Content Cal. Each show, we're going to be talking all things social media, like video, branding, strategy, and influencer marketing. And each show will bring on a very special guest to share their knowledge and their insights too. We're not just recording today's episode, though. We're broadcasting live on Facebook and on YouTube. And for those who are listening live, you can use our social channels to ask any questions to today's special guest. More on that in a moment. Our social channels for Twitter at ShareSocialLDN and Instagram SharingSocialLondon. My name is Ian. I'm founder of Base Creative, and I'm with Becca, who works with me as a social media manager. And we've got all-round social media superbod, founder of Content Cal, Andy Lambert, who was a guest on one of the episodes last series, but we love so much, we invited back for a permanent slot on this series. But today, our hero for this episode is Nada Alkutbi, social media leader for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at IBM, who we'll hear from in a few moments. And I cannot wait to hear what Nada's got to say on social strategy, on content, it's like a kid at Christmas, and on influencer marketing, because that is a theme of today's show. Successful influencer marketing and strategy building. Now, probably a good time actually to bring Andy, to bring you in, the smiley, hugely energetic face of Content Cal, and you run plenty of videos and do a social media roundup. I mean, it's as if I can't get away from you when I put on LinkedIn. You've also taken a live, that's okay. No complaints from me, not yet. You've taken a live stage, virtual and in real life. What is it like being such a famous influencer?
Oh my word, Ian. No, we're not going there. Yes. Either way, I'm just pleased that people want to listen when I'm very excited about certain topics, and yeah, people seem to want to follow. But either way, it's not detract from who's the real star of this show, as you say. Nada, thank you so much for taking the time out of your likely very busy diary to have a chat with us, because I think you've got such brilliant stuff to share. Just for everyone's background, really. I mean, you've got 9 years experience in digital and social, and a really interesting career, like even before IBM, but particularly within IBM. But before we get into that, how are you doing? Most importantly.
Thank you so much. I'm doing well. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Absolute pleasure.
So your current role, social media leader, that's a fairly new role for you, right? You're about 6 months into it. So, well, firstly, belated congratulations. And I'd love to hear a bit around like how your career, particularly in IBM, has led you to this place. I think it'd be fascinating for others to know that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. So yeah, absolutely. So I am new in this role. So I am the social media leader at IBM, and I cover the Europe, Middle East, and Africa regions. And yep, I started this role just in March this year. And prior to that, I was a social media strategist at IBM in the UK for 4 years. So I did that role for 4 years. And then for 4 years before that, I was a digital marketing strategist also at IBM in the UK. So very new in this role. In this role now, I'm essentially responsible for the overall direction and social strategy at IBM in EMEA, basically whilst ensuring that we are aligned with the IBM global social discipline.
Amazing. I mean, it sounds like an absolutely massive role. Can you give us a bit of a flavor for what your kind of day-to-day looks like? How big's the team? How big is the kind of influence you need to make within or the impact you need to make within IBM?
Yeah, absolutely. So I essentially work with about 30 social media practitioners in EMEA. EMEA covers 9 markets, about 122 countries, but I also collaborate and work really, really closely with the global social discipline team, and also various disciplines, comms, brand amplification, and obviously marketing. So in my role, so everything I do is all around kind of building brand relevance for IBM, driving growth. So we are focused on various projects, experimenting and running pilots, editorial councils, and running our influencer marketing programs. So in terms of my day-to-day, it does look very different every day. So some days I'm focused on kind of running experiments and pilots. Other days I'll be building the social strategies for our events and signature moments. And then other days you'll find me working on our editorial council and influencer marketing campaigns.
That's incredible. I mean, it seems like such a massive role to me. So, I mean, have you found it a bit of a transition from going out of because I guess in your previous roles, getting more involved in the kind of day-to-day piece? I know you've been a strategist all throughout it, but more involved in the day-to-day to taking more of a leadership oversight position. Has that been a bit of a transition for you to get to grips with, or how have you found it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the biggest change is doing less execution. Of course, I still kind of work on building our social strategies, which I did in the previous role as well. But I think that is probably the biggest difference. Like, I feel like I'm working on fewer things at the moment, on fewer calls, but working on like bigger, more strategic projects. And it is challenging. Obviously, kind of my experiences in digital and social media marketing, and I'm confident when it comes to social media. But I think it's there's lots of new things that I'm kind of involved in at the moment, and kind of just different projects. And I do feel like I've been pushed outside my comfort zone, and it is challenging, but I'm also really enjoying it. I think the other thing that's different and new is also obviously I spent kind of 8 years working in the UKI with the UKI market. And now I kind of cover and work with colleagues across 122 countries, across 9 markets. And I think that's been one of the greatest things actually in this role, is just getting to learn more about the different cultures and languages and different teams and their norms. And so that's been fascinating. And really enjoyed that aspect.
I bet it has. Yeah, been incredibly eye-opening, I bet. But yeah, no, it's a fascinating role, and as I say, congratulations on that's a long time to be working in IBM, and great to be progressing it forward. So yeah, massive congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
but talking about the strategy piece, because that's been a constant throughout the course of your career, right? And we often talk about social media strategy at you need to have a strategy, and lots of people will say that, but what does that actually mean? Talk to us about what goes into creating your strategy. I have a load of other questions related to that, but let's try and explore the strategic element in as much depth as we can.
No, absolutely. So our mission in social is essentially to build belief in IBM through relevant story-driven content and ongoing connection and dialogue with our audiences. So basically everything we do in social media helps us build the brand and grow the business. And so for me, obviously we know that social impacts the whole entire funnel. And for me, a successful social media strategy is one that inspires through storytelling and advocacy. So those are kind of big areas that we focus on. At the moment, we are focused on our strategy being audience first. So basically always starting with the audience in mind. So kind of outside in approach. One that is data driven. So really important that we obviously look at the data, understand our audiences, and also understand what kind of content performs well and why, and always being informed and led by the data. And then finally, it's got to be one that is tailored for the platform and the channel. So any content we create, it's not one size fits all. We've got to make sure the content is tailored for the specific social media channel and platform. So in terms of social media strategies, some of the things that I've personally have worked on building have been around our signature moments and events, Think. So both the Global Think event, worked closely with the global team on that, but also last year when I was in the UKI role, building the social strategy for our UKI Think event. And for that, our objectives were around kind of the 4 Cs. So firstly, looking at the social channels, that we're focused on. So which channels we want to be on, which channels we're best to engage with our audiences on. So like prioritizing LinkedIn and Twitter, for example. The second C was around champions, so employee advocacy and really enabling and empowering our employee advocates to be social, and of course focusing on external influences as well. And then the third C is around cadence. So I really believe that less is more, and it's important that we focus on quality over quantity. And we have seen when we publish fewer pieces of content that it drives higher engagement. And then the fourth C is around the content, so producing high quality content that is social first and tailored to the platform.
Very nice. Yeah, I love that 4C methodology. Is that something that you had personally developed, or has it been like part of IBM's kind of mantra?
I think it has been part of IBM's mantra, and I think even though we developed that last year, even for our recent Think event, that's definitely been something that we've looked at in terms of less is more. Really focusing on influencer marketing, and we talk about being creating social first content as something that's really important to us. Being audience first and audience led. So yeah, I think it still is important. It's something that we all kind of follow in all our campaigns as well.
Nice. Okay, so from like the strategic element, so it makes sense in terms of how you set it up and how you structure it and how you prioritize those kind of key moments as you described, that the Think event as in this example. So then how do you demonstrate the success of that strategy? What are the things you're tracking and measuring? Talk to us about how you then report that up, because I think a bit of a underlying theme here that I'd be interested to explore with you is that typically social media and content marketing in general doesn't have the requisite perception across the senior leadership of many organizations, right? So, people say we should do social, we should do content marketing, but it doesn't really drive the strategic ambitions of a business. So it sounds like IBM are not in that camp, but I'm kind of interested to hear that from you.
It's a great question. And I think for measurement, I mentioned earlier how like our mission and everything we do in socials around like building the brand and growing the business. So in terms of building the brand, the KPIs and the measurements that we'd look at are all around the upper funnel metrics. So that's looking at on-platform engagements, which are likes, comments, shares. And I think that's a really good indication that our content is resonating with our followers and audiences on social. And then obviously there's the middle part, which is CX. So that's obviously really important to monitor inbound DMs and comments that we're getting, making sure that our audiences know that they're heard and that we're responding and commenting back and engaging in a dialogue with them. And then lower funnel, that's basically around the conversion piece. So traffic driven to our landing pages, engaged visits, what percentage of new visitors we're driving through the different social tactics and channels, and then of course any registrations that were driven through the event, and responses as well.
Really interesting. So it's analytics across the strategy then are a full funnel ultimately.
Absolutely.
So it's not all right. So and then does that get reported across a business, or is it just within like the marketing function where they're interested in seeing this? Curious to know like how high level like the value of content marketing is seen across the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's really important is we're able to report back to our stakeholders on the performance of our campaigns. So in this case, having the tools to be able to look at those KPIs and pull those analytics and the performance to then share not only with our marketing stakeholders, but also, the sales teams and the wider business. So for us, having the tools is really important, being able to pull those results regularly on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis, or, if it's, ad hoc for a specific event, and be able to show that journey. So being able to show this post promoting the Think event drove 300 engagements per post. Our benchmark is, for example, 150. So it's above benchmark. And also you can see all the positive comments there and the positive sentiment towards the content. And then in terms of, tracking the full journey, we track all our tag links. So we're able to then attribute any registrations or responses directly back to that specific social media post. So I think attribution is really important because, yeah, we've got to show the results that we're driving from social media.
Love it. 2 key points stand out for me. Clearly attribution, because not enough people really think about attribution modeling enough, and sometimes it seems more complex and scary than it actually is, really, because essentially what I'm presuming you're adding is a UTM, a unique UTM per each post, right? So it's not rocket science to do it. It's just about doing it, really, which is the key difference. And then the other piece you mentioned, which I'm a huge fan of, is about benchmarking. Like, it's so hard to understand in social. Like, what does good look like? What do we expect? Is 300 likes good? Is 20 comments good? Don't know. Like, benchmarking your own experience is such an important thing, because that's how you can level up. I mean, what do you use your benchmark? Are you just looking at your averages across previous events, or campaigns?
So I think that's a great question. So I personally would say it's always good to just benchmark against yourself as well, like how well your content performed last year. So we often would look at things like year-on-year improvement. So we'd benchmark against, like, the event in 2020 and see how how many registrations we drove for that event, and the average engagements per post last year versus what it is this year. So are we increasing our engagements per post by 10% or 20%? So I think it's always kind of setting those targets and being able to improve against ourselves year on year. I think it's always interesting to also compare against, similar accounts as well. So, within, whether it's comparing against other markets, I mentioned there's 9 markets in EMEA, perhaps there are other accounts across the other countries that we can compare the performance of our UKI channel with DAC or, Fiji. So I think there's different ways to compare and benchmark. It's obviously hard because I think, some accounts have different followers and it varies. But I think at least being able to benchmark against your own account, that how it performed last year, and are you kind of like increasing your followers? Are you improving your engagements per post and engagement rate year on year? I think is a good benchmark to do.
Love it. That makes a whole heap of sense. So before we move on to some of the other kind of important elements that you've been particularly proud of as well, because you've mentioned influencers a lot and employee advocacy and all that stuff. So I'm really keen to dive into that. Before we do, actually, what I'm interested in is about kind of the culture of social media within IBM. And have you seen that shift to become more of a social first organization? Is the importance of social media rising in importance? Is it still seen as a bit of a niche endeavor, not connected to business objectives? Because, they're, as a leading light in the B2B industry, right? IBM, really curious to understand the internal perception of social.
Yeah, no, I think it has continued to increase. And I think COVID and obviously going through, the last year and 8 months, I think has shifted things a lot. And I think, our audiences, stakeholders, sellers and clients are obviously all on digital and all on social. And, all the stats obviously show that people are spending more time on LinkedIn and reading thought leadership content. And we know that the buyer journey is all starts, 70% of it starts online. So I think it has continued to grow in importance, and I think everybody has turned to digital and social. So we have been really busy in the last year and a half, kind of making sure that everybody feels empowered and enabled, and they've got everything they need to support them to really continue to nurture and engage with their clients on social media, because obviously it became one of the key channels for them to communicate and to continue those relationships. So we definitely saw kind of an increase in interest in digital and social, more enablement, and just pivoting towards being more socially active and having, improving their social eminence. But I think also influencer marketing continues to be important. And I think our stakeholders and the marketing teams see that. So investing more kind of time and effort and resources into influencer marketing campaigns as well. And I think just over the years, I just feel like social has become so important. Like if we've got a big signature event or a campaign, social plays such a huge part in that, and I can really see the difference, which is great to see. So yeah, it has grown in importance, definitely.
That's brilliant to hear. So, I mean, you mentioned a point about influencers increasing in importance of the channel. So that, it seems like a very nice segue for where we're going to head next, because, you know, it seems like it's been a really key part of your strategy, the external influencers piece. So yeah, talk me through, like, completely, you know, end to end, how this initiative started, how you're outreaching them, the whole thing.
Yeah.
If you can.
Well, I am really passionate about influencer marketing, and I've been working on influencer marketing campaigns for years, both, you know, looking at internal influencers and external influencer marketing. And I think, yeah, just in terms of the stats, we all know that people trust other people. So 90% of people are more likely to trust peers over trusting brands. We know that influencers can help us build brand awareness, credibility, and trust within our target audience. And they can really help us change perception for what we want to be known for, or what we want to position ourselves as. And also another thing around influencer marketing is they can help us reach new audiences that perhaps we wouldn't be able to reach ourselves through, like, our own branded channels, for example. And I've had it, you know, through the programs that I've been involved in and managed, we've managed to create some of our best quality content, thought leadership content, through influencer marketing campaigns. So I just think, you know, every team really needs to dedicate kind of the resource and time and effort into working on developing their influencer strategy, focusing on both external and internal influencer marketing. You know, we talk in IBM about how important it is that you focus on the things that will drive the biggest impact. And for me, I think influencer marketing is that thing. So really, really important. And I think from the events that I talked about, you know, Think and our various other campaigns, you can just see the results where influencers have helped us drive client registrations for our events. They have helped us drive engaged visits and conversions. So, and helped us drive a new high percentage of new visitors to our landing pages as well. So the results just, you know, kind of speak for themselves from those campaigns. And so in terms of I've been working with running influencer marketing campaigns for years, since I was in the social role. I think we've come a long way, and, you know, being able to then identify influencers that we turn into IBM advocates and build that long-term relationship with a set of individuals isn't easy, and it does take time. But my recommendation for teams would be to start small, see the results, and then scale. Because that's one of the kind of main key learnings for me for running influencer marketing campaigns.
Really interesting. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So talking about how we find influencers in the first place, how do you go about doing that? Because that's 90% of the challenge right there, finding the good people to work with. So yeah,
absolutely. So we work with a third-party agency that helps us identify influencers based on the topics we're interested in. So if we're interested in hybrid cloud influencers, then we're able to identify influencers based on those topics that we're interested in and want to be known for. And I think it really does help working with a third-party agency to do that, because otherwise it can be a manual process to try and find your external influencers who talk to sustainability or, you know, quantum computing. So it really is helpful working with a third-party agency, because they do the identification of the influencers for us. They've got their own kind of measurement around, like, how they rank the influencers based on authority, reach, resonance, relevance. And then we're able to identify which influencers we potentially want to work with. I think for me, what's been really useful actually is introducing those influencers to our IBM SMEs to build that relationship with. Because often you have those individuals would want to connect with like-minded individuals as well, like our experts. And then it's thinking, once you've identified the influencers, what's your strategy and plan? So what are you going to do with this list of individuals that you want to connect with? Is it that you want to introduce them to your SMEs, or is it that you want to involve them in your campaigns? get them involved to speak at our events or to co-create content. So thought leadership content is another key benefit from working with influencers as well.
That's really interesting, because that's often a massive challenge, because there's so much like creative opportunity when you work with someone, right? There's just so many different ways to collaborate, which is really interesting. But before we go into that a little bit more, is there a certain size of influencer you typically work with? Is there a difference in impact that you've seen through people with, hundreds of thousands to millions of followers, if you go that high, to those ones that might be a little bit more micro in their influence with more kind of niche communities? Have you seen any difference in performance of those, or do you only work with people above a certain following?
No, I've never really set, kind of in terms of reach. Reach is one of the things, obviously, we would look at, but it's not absolutely everything. So I think for us, we've worked with both macro and micro influencers. I think for me, it's really is about selecting the right influencer that is like the expert in that topic. So you've got to pick someone who, is a thought leader, and I think the other thing as well to think about is like, what social channels are they active on? So if our target audience is mainly on LinkedIn, then I might prioritize someone who's more active on LinkedIn, for example. And also there's a lot on the content, like you were saying about, is it something that we want to try doing a LinkedIn live, and therefore, want someone who regularly does LinkedIn live sessions, or is it someone who's a blogger and writes content? Or is it someone who's like a keynote speaker? So there's different personas, and it's really important that you look at in your brief, when you're, in your strategy, you think about your objectives and what you're trying to do with the influencers. And is it that you want them to get involved and to speak at the events as panelists, or is it that you want them to write content and write long form articles and blogs, or is it that you want to do a LinkedIn live session or a Twitter chat, space session with them? So they've all got different strengths, different platforms that they're active on. Obviously there's the developer community as well, and it's tapping into Reddit and various other platforms that perhaps the developers and our target audience are on as well. So I think that's a key consideration, more than like how many followers they've got. It really is just all about helping us reach our target audience, and who do we select to engage with, that can help us position IBM as the leader in hybrid cloud and AI, and can help us raise awareness of what IBM is up to today. So really that's kind of the key objective there.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. So having gone through this journey over quite a number of years in evolving your influencer strategy, and just as a side note, absolutely with you on that whole kind of channel-led approach, because I think it's an underutilized thought process when we talk about influencers, because yes, they all influence additional reach, additional channels, so reach beyond what you'd get on your own social channels, but getting you active on channels where you're not active already, finding someone that has influence on TikTok, or as you say, Twitter, audio spaces, whatever. That's such a powerful way of opening up a new channel for a business, is using someone that already does well on that channel, rather than starting from scratch. So I love that approach. But having had all of that experience then, Nada, like what are the kind of main learnings you would take away, and what advice would you potentially give to someone who is early on in doing, influencer marketing?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's being really clear on kind of like your objectives. So that's what I've been coaching the teams on at the moment is, everybody wants to kind of tap into working with influencers and running influencer campaigns. I think it's really important that we're very clear on our objectives, what we're trying to achieve, which influencers we want to select and associate with the brand, and who are really relevant. And the other thing that I'm really big on is like co-creating the brief with the influencer. So I would say it isn't just about us also dictating what we want to do. I think it's really important that we have that conversation with the influencers, because they know their audiences best. They know what kind of content resonates best for their audiences as well. So, and it's a great way to then experiment and, pilot and try new tactics and new platforms and channels. And then finally, I think it's so important that we also think what's in it for the influencer. So, it's thinking about like, is it giving them opportunities to collaborate and meet with our executives, or behind the scenes, or sharing with them our announcements or product launches. So it's always thinking, what's in it for the influencer? What will they get out of this collaboration? Are they the right person for us to even collaborate with? So all these considerations are really important.
Yeah, I like that. I really do, because just from our own personal standpoint, we have probably made some missteps in the past of just paying an influencer and expecting something to happen, where actually when we've co-created content together and been an active participant and let more of the lead happen through the influencer, and actually in many cases potentially not parted with anywhere near as much money for it to happen, because there's value for everyone beyond getting paid, I think. So it's a really interesting one. It just requires a bit of creativity and kind of that open-mindedness to, like, I'm basically repeating what you said already, Nada, but
exactly,
to understand what that influencer can achieve and the upside for them, because I guess the nice thing about being at IBM is that you have so many amazing things you could potentially offer someone.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's such a great opportunity to get creative and to try something new. And I think it's so important that we do that in social. And I think we've got that opportunity to really just experiment and try something new and try different platforms, obviously doing your research, but really giving it a go. And I think that's when you kind of learn. And even if it doesn't perform well and we fail, you kind of learn from failure, and that's how we grow. So I really think it's a great opportunity to, really get creative.
Yeah, love it. That's a really nice kind of point to move on to the final bit that I wanted to discuss, because you did touch on internal versus external influencers. So let's talk about your internal influencers. So when I first came to hear about you for the first time, you were talking about employee advocacy. So you have a gigantic sales team, right? So a huge opportunity to facilitate and mobilize that team. I'm a massive evangelist for the power of social being distributed across an organization. So give us a bit of a flavor for how this works and how you're evolving your program at IBM.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, really passionate about employee advocacy and kind of enabling and empowering our internal influencers to get social. And I think they often own the relationships with clients and therefore better positioned to engage with our audiences on social. So I absolutely think it's so important and so key for our employees to also get social, engage with our audiences, and also for them to develop and improve their own social eminence and presence. So I think it isn't easy to do, because I think the challenges are you can run loads of enablement sessions and then not quite sure who's going to get social, who's going to do it right. So I think the approach at the moment for me is to really think about the return on investment from everything we do and how we spend our time, and being more strategic in the programs that we run. So maybe working more closely with a specific team on actually creating social content or supporting them in creating social first content. So working closely with our subject matter experts to create vlogs, or involving them in our marketing campaigns, and then again introducing them to the influencers as well. So it's kind of integrated into everything else that we're doing. It shouldn't really just be like an add-on, and it shouldn't it's not just about amplification. So it really has got to be authentic. They've got to want to do it. So it's focusing on those IBMers that see the value in being socially active and are keen to build relationships and engage. And again, I mentioned this earlier, I think it's important you start small and then scale so that you're able to see the results quicker. And it's also important maybe to break down your employee advocates into different tiers. So having your, tier 1, top tier, who are white glove service. So those are the execs or kind of small group of IBMers or individuals that you'll do one-to-one sessions with, really work with comms to develop a visibility plan and content plan for them. And then there's your tier 2s, who are your real subject matter experts, those thought leaders that are willing to be involved in your marketing campaigns, speak at your events and webinars, and to help you produce thought leadership content. And then perhaps your tier threes are kind of like all other IBMers that might want to get social. So it's thinking about, how do you scale that enablement? How do we keep their skills up to date? How do we engage with them and communicate with them? What platforms? So I think it is challenging. It's not easy to do, but I think we've come a long way, and I think we've got huge opportunities there to really tap into and collaborate with our employee advocates more.
So where would you say, because it sounds like you're on this journey at the moment, and I appreciate it's a massive, massive task, right? Because there's still a lot of unknowns, because it's still a fairly new discipline, if you will, right? So, and it does come with quite a degree of reputational risk as well with it.
Yeah.
So where would you say you are at in your kind of journey, if you had to kind of picture it and lay it out as to, I really like the tiering system, by the way, actually, but yeah, where would you say you're at IBM?
I think we have come a long way in terms of running kind of enough raising awareness of like what it is and how important it is. So I think we've reached that point, and I think the next stage is like just centralizing and streamlining kind of the process and the strategy a bit more, because I think one of the challenges we have is you just kind of got different teams doing different things on different platforms and slightly different ways of doing employee advocacy in the countries and markets, which is okay, but I do think it's good to understand the current landscape at the moment and take away some key learnings on what are the things that are currently working well, what are the things that we want to continue, continue doing, and then taking those insights and developing an approach moving forward in terms of how we make it even better. And absolutely it does come with risk. I mean, I think from a brand safety perspective, and also just making sure that our employees feel like we've got social computing guidelines in place, so that making sure that everybody adheres to those guidelines as well, but also still feeling kind of empowered and confident to get social as well.
Yeah, that's always the delicate balance, isn't it? Between yes, you have free reign, we'd love you to do it and run with it, have your own voice and personality, but also don't go too far.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely a clear list of do's and don'ts that we'd encourage our IBMers to follow. Yeah, totally.
I love it. No, it's fascinating insight. And I really like, through everything that you've spoken about, there's a kind of narrative of like starting small, experimentation, establishing what works, and recognizing that it's all a journey, right? This is not the final piece. We haven't got it all nailed on, but like just working through it and trying to get better with every day. And I love that. It's actually quite reassuring when you hear someone talk like that from an organization the size and scale of yours, right? Because you realize that it's okay when we're learning every day. We haven't got it all figured out, because we're all trying to figure this out as we go, right?
Exactly.
And I guess this is probably a really nice time, actually, Ian, to hand back to you, because we've been, capturing some questions as we've been streaming this live. So great to hear what we've got going on.
Yeah, I mean, I've loved that. No, thank you very much for sharing that insight. I think also what resonated with me really well was measurement. I mean, I'm a huge data person. How you're tracking social, how you're attributing outcomes to an original post, I think is great to hear. And also co-creating the brief with influencers, you mentioned, it's an obvious way forward, because as you say, those guys are going to know their audience better than anyone else. If you give them a script, it's just not going to work, rather than letting them write the script themselves. Becca, you've been listening out and creating some questions as well before the show and during the broadcast. What have we got?
I have. I just wanted to say thank you as well, Nada. It's been really, really helpful, and some of these questions you've already touched on a little bit, but our first one is here. So when new networks or types of content like audio spaces, so thinking a lot about Clubhouse or Twitter Spaces there, come along. How do you decide if and when these should become a part of your social media strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think with emerging platforms, it's so important that we do audience research first, and then also staying up to date with all these kind of new emerging platforms that are being introduced. And I think it just goes down to having, dedicated team to be able to do that analysis and do that research to understand where our audience is hanging out, and I still believe that go wherever our audiences are at. So if they are hanging out on Clubhouse, then let's experiment and let's see if we can do something to again join a room and collaborate on a specific topic and have presence there. If it's Twitter Spaces, and I think we're all up for experimenting and piloting. So it really is just doing that analysis and doing that research to develop a point of view on IBM's approach on Clubhouse, IBM's approach on Twitch and all these different platforms and TikTok, and understanding the platforms as well. And a lot of these platforms are also kind of led by employees. So it just makes employee advocacy even more important, because they're not really places for brands to have presence. They're more places for individuals to join a conversation and to take part. So that's another consideration.
I'm really interested actually in one particular platform, and mainly because Sharing Social had a bit of a stint on Clubhouse. In particular, then, what's IBM's stance on Clubhouse? What's your view of it as well? Has it got a future?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm trying to. I think we ran a few pilots on Clubhouse and to test the platform. And again, they are platforms to involve our advocates in, and to choose the relevant rooms that we might want to tap into and take part in, rather than obviously setting it all up ourselves and expecting people to come to us. So I think it's really clear that we're open to experiments. I think if any of the teams are really interested in joining a Clubhouse, then we'd look at what that is and how we can support them in kind of just doing it correctly and in the right way and getting the support that they need. But so I think we'll always look at those platforms and think, is this a platform that we want to be on? Is it relevant for us and our audiences? And just looking at kind of like pros and cons, and just taking away the key learnings from the pilots and the experiments that we run, so that we can improve further and in the next experiments and pilots.
Yeah, I was listening to a talk this morning, and it was someone who didn't really use social that much, but he has written a book, and it's a very popular book, but he said, look, Instagram isn't for me. I just don't take good images of myself or of other things. And neither is Facebook for a similar reason. But Clubhouse is just exploding for him because he's a very eloquent voice. He speaks very well, and he talks sense. I think maybe that's all that you need. But it's interesting to hear your views about Clubhouse. Becca.
Okay, so next question is about benchmarking. So what is the biggest challenge that you face when reporting campaign results back to stakeholders? Specifically, what happens if you haven't met your benchmarks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the biggest challenge is probably, presenting social KPIs to stakeholders that are not so familiar with, our KPIs that we care about in social. So I think that's the biggest challenge when we present results that we think are really important in social, like the upper funnel metrics, which obviously indicate if the content is resonating well, and they are important. I think often, when I've presented this before, some people don't quite understand what an engagement is and what does that mean, and how do you actually track brand awareness and relevance. And so I think there could be some confusion there around the KPIs. So I think it's kind of like just educating our stakeholders and what our social KPIs are, what they mean, the definition for them. And also just being able to explain that they are important, and it's not always all about opportunities and responses. We'll get there, but the social plays such a big role upper funnel and in just having a conversation with our audiences, raising awareness of what we're up to today. It doesn't always necessarily mean that we'll convert into opportunities. So often I get asked, how many opportunities did we create from this post? And actually a lot of times it's about the relationships and it's about the conversations that we have.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's things that you can't yet track or measure, which can be difficult, I'm sure, to keep the strategy going. I'm quite interested what the pushback you've had then at IBM. I know you've been working at IBM for 9 years, 8 years.
Yeah, coming up to 10 years in October. It was 10 years in October, yeah.
What was it like pushing the social media agenda 8 years ago, 9 years ago, even when you were working more on digital marketing strategy? But it was a very different landscape and a very different conversation with those leaders and managers.
Yeah, I think so, and that's why I could really see how far we've come. And I think, with digital, so when I did the digital role, I sort of spent half my time doing digital marketing and social media marketing, and I think you naturally will kind of always prioritize where budget is being spent. And at the time, social was just all organic and just our own social platforms, and I felt like we spent more time obviously on kind of our search campaigns and paid media and content syndication and all the other digital tactics over kind of own social. And I think with social it was really hard because it was like a bonus. It was like, oh, it's nice to have, if we're able to do social, then great. And I remember at the time as well, like any team could just create a Twitter handle and start tweeting. And so I think we've come a long way with social computing guidelines in place and very specific social brand guidelines as well that we follow, and realizing as well over the years that it's so important we streamline our presence. Having more accounts doesn't mean we'll drive more engagement. In fact, I think less is more in everything we do, and I think that's something that we're seeing more of now. It's really thinking about our presence. If we could start from scratch, what would it actually look like on social in terms of our own social platforms and channels? So I think it's changed a lot. And I think now we've also, got more resource and focus in social because it is a full-time role. And even within social, there's different disciplines and expertise that's needed with looking at emerging platforms and doing that research, looking at influencer marketing, internal, external, editorial councils and content, social first content creation. So, so I think it has come a long way.
Well, I bet you got a huge pushback when you first mentioned influencer marketing. I imagine even now the word influencer marketing can leave a bitter taste in people's mouths. So sometimes reference, negative BBC documentaries about someone being scammed or, what little influencers contribute. Now we're talking about a very different type of people, certainly from hearing your interview with Andy. Did you get major pushback when you started to even use that term influencer marketing inside IBM?
Yeah, I think the pushback mainly came from perhaps people not fully understanding what influencer marketing is and what we're trying to achieve. So I remember spending a lot of time just going through what influencer marketing is, and even until now, like just trying to educate our stakeholders and teams on the stats that I talked about earlier about we know people trust other people. Influencers have significant authority and credibility in the marketplace and can help us reach new audiences that we simply can't reach ourselves. Just always being able to provide the stats and the facts to support the argument around like why influencer marketing is important. And I think with everything I do, always start with the why anyway. And I think, that's when you'll see people kind of, when they really understand it, will be like, absolutely, this is a no-brainer. We should be doing influencer marketing. And I think even our stakeholders and their sales teams as well, I've had such positive feedback from them when I've introduced them to external influencers. And they're like, you've selected the right people here that are real experts in hybrid cloud and AI, that we should be building relationships with and collaborating with, and they just simply have enjoyed having conversations with those people, like-minded individuals.
Great. So the data never lies, essentially. You've got data to back up why this is a great idea.
Exactly. I think it helps a lot, because I think when we first started back in the day, actually, I didn't have much data to support the success of this, but I just knew this was the right thing to do. And I think it also to stick with it, because it can be really difficult to see the results, and it does take time. You definitely don't see results overnight, and it does take time to build those authentic relationships. Because social is about people, and it's about relationships that you build with those individuals.
Absolutely spot on. Becca, we've got one more question, haven't we?
We do. Final question, which ties in really nicely with what you've just talked about, actually. So do you have an example of a really successful influencer collaboration that exceeded your expectations?
Yes. So I'd go back to the example I kind of touched on briefly on Think. So just seeing, so for Think UKI, so we worked with external influencers around kind of data and AI topics and cloud, so the topics that we cared about for the event. And we worked with just a handful of influencers, like 4 or 5, and those thought leaders and experts basically got involved in the event. So they took part as panelists. We ran LinkedIn live sessions before. So those are the things I was talking about, experimenting. It was co-creating the brief with those individuals, where they said, I'd like to do a blog and I'll publish this on my newsletter. I'll also offer to do a LinkedIn live session on this topic. And that's what worked so well. So we created good quality thought leadership content before the event. In terms of engagements and those metrics, it exceeded our benchmark for what content we publish on our own branded channels. And also in terms of attribution and that whole measurement, we can see that the links we gave them, they helped drive engaged visits to our landing pages and registrations for our events. So we can just see how influencers, drove like 5 times the number of registrations that we drove from our own channels. And I think that's a big kind of learning and a big successful story, where it really does show how powerful working with influencers can be.
Brilliant. And that was one of my questions, actually. I was like, well, we didn't great examples. That's a great one. So you want to finish up on the show, a quick recap on what we've spoken about. We've spoken about influencer marketing, about measurement, how key the data is, and also about strategy. For those who are listening, don't forget, you can get involved for the next show by keeping an eye out for the next topic and live broadcasts, and put your questions through our social channels on Twitter at ShareSocialLDN and on Instagram at Sharing Social London. A big thank you to Nada, social media leader for EMEA at IBM, for being on the show today and sharing your insights. Quick reminder, actually, how can people get in touch with you, Nada, if they've got a question? What's the best social channel to use?
So I'm on social media like 24/7, because obviously it's my day job. So I live and breathe social. You can find me on LinkedIn to connect with me on there, and DM me, or on Twitter. So yeah, I'm passionate about social media on all social media platforms. But yeah, pretty much all day, and outside of working hours, on Instagram and other platforms as well.
Sounds like you're permanently glued to your phone. But thank you very much for that, Nada. Again, that is a wrap for our first episode of Sharing Social Season 2. We're back next month, and I cannot wait for myself, Becca, Andy, and Nada. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next month.
Thank you.